Have you ever been personally victimized by a swatch that is a lying liar? You were so good and you knit a swatch and measured your gauge and everything. Now you're swimming along, minding your own business, knitting your garment, and suddenly you have the wrong gauge, the wrong size, everything is wrong. It's possible you even discover this while you're blocking your finished garment and you spent literally 50, 60 hours knitting this thing and now it's the wrong size. If this has happened to you, you are not the only one. This is incredibly common and why knitters are often saying that swatches are liars. Today we're going to go over some of the top reasons why swatches might be lying to you and some of my tips on how to prevent that from happening to you. If that is something that you're interested in, then keep watching. Hello, my name is Amy Scher and I am a knitting pattern designer, a sewist, spinner, sometimes weaver, living in St. Louis, Missouri, and my patterns and my business are all about helping you find joy in your knitting and joy in the wearing of your knitting, creating things that are not only a fun time to knit, but also that you'll enjoy and wear forever. And part of this process is swatching. I found over the years as a designer that many people don't like swatching, or they find that their swatching is not often accurate. And of course, it can be so frustrating when you've done everything right that you know of and your garment still turns out not as planned. So today, let's go over some of the ways that your swatching might not quite be optimal for the purpose that swatching serves. Reason number one, your swatch was too small. I get this all the time from many knitters who will cast on exactly the number of stitches required for 4 inches, block it, stretch it, and call it a day. So we designers typically give our gauge in 4-inch squared and 10 centimeter squared, and that's kind of the industry standard for how we list our gauges. This is just because it's easily convertible, it's easily broken down into 4, it's just a good size to measure from. And over the course of 4 inches, you can get a pretty good idea of what your gauge is gonna be. However, the edges of a swatch can be lying liars, they're not reliable, and the way that we block them, the way that they're laying flat, the way that they've been washed, all of these things can impact particularly how those edge stitches behave. So I always recommend that you swatch with, yes, 8 inches minimum, and make sure that you have a big old swatch so that not only can you understand how the gauge really is going to be in a larger piece of fabric, but that you can evaluate the fabric itself to see if it's something you want to wear on your body. Sometimes you might make a large swatch and you'll find that you actually don't want like a drop shoulder oversized garment in that swatch. That fabric is not going to work out for an oversized garment. Maybe it's perfect for a more closely fitted garment. So not only will a larger swatch give you more flexibility and more accuracy in measuring and more areas to measure, it'll also help you match your project to the perfect fabric so that you can come up with a garment you truly will love and wear. So I recommend that you make an initial swatch in stockinette for at least 8 inches and then measure at the very center of this. And don't forget to measure a few times in a few different rows and columns so you can make sure you're exactly on gauge. So you've made your swatch. Is it time to cast on? No, it is not. The second reason that swatches can be lying liars is because you simply didn't treat it the way you will your finished object. Unless you never plan to get your finished object wet, unless you never plan to go out into the snow and rain, unless you never plan to wash a finished object, you need to wash your swatch. I know it's so tedious and so annoying, but wet blocking your swatch will give it the treatment that you need to find out what your final gauge is gonna be. My biggest tip for wet blocking your swatch is to soak it well, at least 15 minutes, and then don't pin it out. Unless you're going to pin your final project out and it has some kind of lacy elements, swatches do not need to be overly pinned. If you aggressively stretch out your swatch to get gauge, you haven't really gotten gauge. When I list a gauge, I really do mean like, what does this yarn knit up at this needle really want to be? If you're aggressively and unnaturally stretching it out to meet the gauge, you're not actually going to understand what kind of fabric you're getting naturally. If you have to stretch out a swatch aggressively to get gauge, you're gonna have to do that on the final project as well. And over time, because wool has memory, particularly wool garments and wool accessories, will want to start shrinking back to where they want to be naturally because they have natural crimp in them. Anytime they're exposed to humidity and wet and damp, they're going to want to shrink back and you're going to have to stretch it out. every time. So I highly recommend that you measure your gauge swatch naturally, just lay it flat. I like to make my swatches with a little bit of a garter edge and then like 8 inches in between. That way when I lay it flat, it just lays flat. It shrinks down to whatever it needs to be as it dries. When I measure it, that's gonna be the natural gauge of that swatch. Never overstretch your swatch to get gauge because you're gonna have the same problem on your final project. Third reason why your swatch may be a lying liar is that you swatched only in stockinette and your final project has a stitch pattern in it. Whether it be lace, color work, or cables, you're going to have to swatch every single element that's present in your pattern to make sure that you're getting the desired product. Sometimes a fabric might look wonderful in stockinette. I like to swatch in stockinette, a nice big one like I said, 8 inches, and then I'll swatch some of the design elements, especially stitch patterns. This helps me make sure that I have everything laid out the way I want it to be. So here is an example of that. This is my second swatch for the friendship pullover. It has some of the cable panels so I can understand how the cable changes the gauge. This is actually my second cable swatch. I think I have another cable swatch that's like just the cable. And then it has some of the decreases for the yoke. It has a little neckband, which I highly recommend. Like if you have a contiguous neckband like this, that really matters to the design and you want it to sit just so. You want to make sure it's not too floppy. This kind of design really benefits from a bit of swatching. I do like to swatch my ribbing along with the rest of my fabric to see how it's going to behave. Different knitters knit ribbing very differently, and I often find that my ribbing turns out a little puffier than a designer's, and I need to size down for the ribbing. And by the time I've knit a garment, it's too late for that. So it's always better to find these things out ahead of time rather than later. Just swatch everything you possibly can, and that will really increase your chance of being successful and having a predictable result with your final garment. The next reason that your swatch may be a lying liar is that you swatched in the round versus swatching in the flat. For many people, myself included, our flat knitting gauge is a little bit different from our in the round knitting gauge, and this can be challenging. Now, there are some lucky knitters. I know Stephanie of Edible Thoughts Makes is one of them, who do not need to swatch in the round. This is not the case for me, and I loathe swatching in the round. But over the years, I've really found that my purling is a little bit puffier than my knitting. This is called rowing out, and you end up with that thing where every other row is a little bit puffier, and it's super annoying, and it does change your gauge. So if your project is knit in the round, I highly recommend that you also swatch in the round. Or if you're a cheating cheater like me, you can do this thing where I swatch in the flat, I swatch for my gauge, and then I cast on and knit like 6 inches of the project, and then I block that. This in effect turns my project into a second swatch, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a big fan of blocking your projects at any and all opportunities to make sure everything's going well. Some other recommendations I have is starting with the pocket or with the sleeve, just making sure that your project is also a second swatch, basically. The next reason your swatch might be lying to you is that you didn't track the before and after gauge. So I'm the most guilty of this. When I make a swatch, I'm in such a rush to start the project, I dunk it in water immediately, and then I don't know what my knitting gauge is. What do I mean by knitting gauge? I mean the gauge that you are getting when you are knitting and before it's blocked. This is important information because as you are working on your garment, you will want to know what your working gauge is while you're knitting, the pre-blocking gauge, as well as the post-blocking gauge. This will help you predict the finished garment and how it's going to block out way better than if you just track the finished gauge. I need to do that more, and I'm not very good at it, but that's something that you should keep in mind, to just always take notes, write down what your swatch gauge is before and after blocking so that you can compare your ongoing project with the before gauge and you're not confused on what you're actually aiming for while you're knitting. Finally, when all is said and done, if you do not swatch, then your garment is your first swatch. And when you knit your entire garment and it is your first swatch, there's like a high to medium chance that it's not going to end up the way you planned. However, when you have swatched once or twice, then your garment becomes your second or third swatch. And in the end, a large piece of fabric, such as a garment, is still going to behave differently on the blocking board and on your body than a small 8x8 swatch. In the end, you have to stay vigilant and constantly check your knitting gauge or even block a partial project to make sure that you are still on track to doing what you need to do. Oftentimes the row gauge can change, whether due to just the garment being heavier while you're knitting or due to the fiber content. I particularly struggle with this when it comes to silk, cotton, and linen content in my projects. I find that those tend to stretch out the row gauge as I'm working. If it's a one-piece garment, like a knit in around top-down garment, the longer it gets, the bigger it gets, the more the weight drags on my needles while I'm working on it, and that can often change my row gauge. So I'm a big fan of just blocking a garment, blocking a project, whenever, wherever. For this project behind me, this is the coloring book tee. I blocked it when I reached the yoke divide for the sleeves, and then I blocked it again halfway through the body, then I blocked it again here, and then I blocked it again when I finished one sleeve. That helped me make sure that every proportion is sitting where it should. Another thing to watch out for is that sometimes if you have silk, linen, or cotton content, or particularly projects that are like 100% silk, 100% linen, 0% wool, those type of projects will have different drape than wool projects. It might not turn out the way that the designer intended if the designer used a wool or a wool blend for their sample. Watch out for those because the drape of a fabric means that it might have more folds in it than you're used to. I find that silk garments, particularly for me, always look way bigger than they actually are just because of the way the fabric falls. On the blocking table, it's perfect to schematics, and then on my body, it looks very loosey-goosey. And that's just the nature of silk. When you're planning your projects, definitely look out for that. You can see that there are so many variables that go into how a swatch behaves versus how a garment behaves in the end. Particularly in garment knitting, this can be so tricky since we spend so many hours knitting them and we want them to be a success. Sticking to some of these best practices for garment knitting and garment swatching will really help set you up for success so that you can end up with a garment that fits, that is what you expected from the schematics and what the designer intended. And by setting yourself up for success this way, you will enjoy your knitting and enjoy wearing your finished objects way more and stress way less. And it only takes a few hours of swatching and blocking to set yourself up for the best success possible. If you have any questions about swatching, blocking, or any of these technical things that you'd like me to expand on, either in reply or in a future video, please do comment below. We love to hear your questions and your concerns, and we love to help. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like it and help boost us. Leave us a comment and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. My name is Amy Scher, and I've also linked over here a video all about measuring your upper bust to help you predict for a better size selection when you're choosing sizes for your garment. Hopefully, you'll also find that video helpful and you can be living your best life with garment knitting very soon. Thank you so much for watching today, and as always, happy knitting, and I'll talk to you soon.